Microsoft, a company that once spurned open source development, has purchased GitHub, the world's largest repository of open source code, for $7.5 billion. For TechRepublic and ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson with Jason Hiner. Jason, let's start with the big question. Why did Microsoft buy GitHub?
Yeah, it's a great question, of course, right, to start with, because GitHub, they bought GitHub for $7.5 billion. A lot of money, one of their biggest acquisitions ever. But GitHub is not a money maker, right? In what we know of the financials from a Bloomberg report was that they lost $66 million in 9 months of 2016, so not even the whole year. So it is not it's not a cash register. So why would Microsoft do it? Well, I think a lot of it goes to the fact that, as you started with, Microsoft used to be a bit of an open source hater. You know, now they definitely have open source religion. In Azure, you can use Linux. You can use open source software very easily. A lot of it's built on this kind of code, the open source code, open source repositories. So GitHub is the world's largest repository of software. It's an open platform. GitHub itself is not open source, however. It is a closed platform that is all about bringing developers together, but it does bring a lot of them together. Something in the neighborhood of 28 million developers on the platform, 80 million projects there. So Microsoft's play here, and Satya Nadella said this, in its official statement, Microsoft said, GitHub will retain its developer-first ethos and will operate independently to provide an open platform for all developers in all industries, yada, yada, yada. It's the standard language, standard boilerplate. Same thing they said when they bought LinkedIn, which has been one of their more successful acquisitions.
And Skype.
And Skype. Unlike sort of the high-profile fumbles, as I've sort of called them, with like Nokia and Yammer, which haven't gone as well. But to get to why Microsoft bought it, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, said that as part of the acquisition, Microsoft will bring its developer tools and services to new audiences. That's the key, right, for why they bought this thing. They think they can use this platform as a way to offer, and from their perspective, bring value to developers who are trying to build stuff, trying to collaborate, trying to move faster, make products for cheaper. And Microsoft wants to offer them its tools, and especially its cloud, Azure, as the place to do it. Whereas today, it's built on, the platform itself is built on AWS, and a lot of the projects are built on AWS. Now, Microsoft said it'll still let you use AWS, and connect it with what you're doing on GitHub. But this is essentially a big opportunity for them to sell a lot of cloud and a lot of developer tools to the biggest developer platform in the world.
And I think particularly with their acquisition of LinkedIn that you mentioned a moment ago, this will allow Microsoft visibility into not just the talent ecosystem, but other companies. And we'll talk about this in just a moment, but other companies and trends, where and how other companies are investing, what types of code and what types of innovations are happening, not just now, but will happen in the future. As we know, GitHub has so many individual developers, and many of them are also on LinkedIn, but a lot of the innovation that happens on LinkedIn, on GitHub, comes from individuals. So Jason, let's talk about that. How does this impact the development, no pun intended or pun intended, of individuals who are launching code, sometimes code that may fly under the radar, but end up being the next big thing?
Yeah, so it's great. It's a great point, because the intelligence that Microsoft has available to it now through LinkedIn and through GitHub, the ability to data mine both of these on the back end, right? And understand the ecosystem of, what languages people are coding in, what kinds of companies they're working with, what kinds of projects they're working on. That level of intelligence is almost unparalleled and unprecedented that Microsoft has access to. What they do with that information, who knows? But certainly in terms of their product roadmap for Azure and developing their products to fit the trends and the changes and the ways the winds are blowing, gives them, like I said, a level of intelligence that's unprecedented and incomparable to what anybody else has, with the exception of maybe Google, maybe Facebook, but certainly not in the same direct way that Microsoft has access to it with LinkedIn and now GitHub. So, but from an individual developer standpoint, from to your point, also you think of hiring managers. Now you have that opportunity to look at a coder and not just see their LinkedIn. And this is what a lot of them are doing now, not just look at their LinkedIn profile, their history, their resume essentially, but also look at what have they done? What are the projects they're working on? What have they completed? What's the code that they have to show for their work? And that's what GitHub profiles have in some cases replaced or complemented LinkedIn profiles. And so Microsoft has the opportunity potentially, right, to tie these two together in some interesting ways, your GitHub profile and your LinkedIn profile, where if you're a programmer and you're a coder, and we know the world needs more and more of them over the next decade, it may be the best opportunity to do some really interesting things and present that information in interesting ways. And maybe as the world's moving, there's a lot of talk about what you've done, what you've accomplished, and your portfolio being more important than your resume in the world that we're moving into. And so this positions Microsoft in an interesting way to connect those dots.
Yeah, in many ways, LinkedIn has become the Facebook, if not more powerful than Facebook, for business technology professionals, and linking LinkedIn, I keep making puns unintentionally, linking LinkedIn to GitHub allows Microsoft to see the talent-employer relationship. So let's talk about those employers, Jason. A lot of biz tech professionals as well as biz tech companies will be impacted by this because their code is also on GitHub. Their profiles are in LinkedIn. How does this impact, will this impact other companies in not just the tech space, but as every company undergoes digital transformation, other companies in general? Will this impact the future of business in ways that we can't yet anticipate?
Probably not, honestly, because I think that a lot of big companies are already, they feel pretty solid about Microsoft. They're using Microsoft for directory services. Many of them are using them, of course, for their computers, their end user devices. And they're already pretty comfortable there. It's kind of like the way it used to be. They used to say about IBM, right? You never got fired for buying IBM. You kind of, if you're in IT and you're running a big company, like, you'd never get fired for buying Microsoft because it's a known entity. And they have very good relations with a lot of enterprise technology professionals, CTOs, CIOs, and that. So a lot of them are already there. And so Microsoft buying it in something they're already using Microsoft, they're already using GitHub, doesn't really change much. Where it's going to have an impact, though, is certainly those small companies, the startups, the entrepreneurs, the coders that are doing, the one-person shop that is trying to launch something interesting. GitHub and open source have a little bit of that anti-authoritarian sort of vibe going. Microsoft is not that, right? It's sort of the antithesis of it. And so can they keep those sort of innovators, creators, those folks who in many ways probably are the future, right? The future billion-dollar companies are in that pool of folks. So can Microsoft be hands-off enough with GitHub that those folks will still want to use the platform? Or will they jump to something like GitLab? TechRepublic has an article on the alternatives. If GitHub freaks you out, the GitHub acquisition by Microsoft freaks you out, here are your alternatives. And we talk about GitLab. That's the number one. And GitLab's put some stats out about the number of code that has been transferred to their platform just in the past week, over the rumors of this acquisition and then the actual news on Monday. So yeah, that's the thing to watch is does that turn into a big movement, or is that just sort of a blip on the radar by a few of the people? There's probably some people that are barely going to notice that Microsoft bought GitHub, and they're already committed to using the platform. And you know how it is, default settings matter, right? If your default is I already sort of commit all my code to GitHub, then there's only a certain percentage that'll change it unless Microsoft is too overbearing in what they do with it.
Yeah, that power of the default or the hegemony of GitHub is going to be interesting to watch play out. That's a fantastic story by James Sanders. If Microsoft buying GitHub freaks you out, here are your best alternatives. I encourage everybody watching this to flip through this. Even if you're locked into GitHub, it's a great source of alternatives. Jason, we have a number of stories up on TechRepublic, including Connor Forrest's story, why LinkedIn and GitHub profiles should be the hidden gem in Microsoft's acquisition. What else do we have on TechRepublic that could be a resource for developers, for employers, and others in business technology who want to wrap their heads around not just this story, but emerging trends in the cloud and open source?
Yeah. Well, so we also have a good, what we call our cheat sheet for GitHub on TechRepublic. That's an easy way to learn about the platform, to understand it a little more deeply. And so we've got some good resources also on ZDNet and CNET, our sister sites, about the business of GitHub and the business of Microsoft and what Microsoft is going to potentially do. And then on our sister site, download.com, we've got a piece on will Microsoft buying GitHub change the future of apps, right? Because a lot of the world's biggest and most important apps are built on the platform. And so going through a lot of the same things we've talked about today. So across CBS Interactive's tech sites, we've got this covered from every angle. So check out not just our stuff, but our sister sites as well for some really great coverage.